City Jazz Sessions is about great music, arts, and entertainment. We are located in St. Louis, Missouri, and available to performance art lovers worldwide. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. You can email us at cityjazzsessions@gmail.com.
Hello, everybody. Good evening out in Jazz Land. This is Warren Harper, Magic Man 50, and this evening, my co-host Leon Davis and I are speaking with Rich Pulin. How are you, Rich?
Oh, I'm doing really good, and I was wondering the same about both of you. How are you guys?
We're doing great.
I
I'm doing great anyway.
yeah.
That's good. Nice to hear that.
I'm getting to know you a little bit from our conversation, so we're going to get right into the meat of the thing, though. Give us a little
Okay.
background on you, where you're from, and how you got started in music.
Well, I am from New York City, actually, the borough of the Bronx, where I was born in 1941. So I'm in my 82nd year right now, and I got into music. Uh, Considering what I just said, I got into music sort of late in life. I was in my teenage years, and I started playing an instrument known as a baritone horn, which is a small looking tuba. And from there, I saw a movie called The Glenn Miller Story, and that changed my life. I came home from the movie theater that evening, and I told my folks, I said, I've got to get a trombone because Jimmy Stewart as Glenn Miller, he looked amazing. He was all dressed in a very fancy, expensive suit, and he had that trombone resting on his arm,
Hmm.
and it looked so good. And every occasionally he picked it up to play a little solo here and there, and his band sounded amazing. So that's what I decided that night. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be a trombone player, and I want to have my own band. And guess what? It all came to pass. It took me a few years, but within the next give or take a year, 10 years or so, I became a band leader, uh, a very competent trombone player, and I started doing a lot of recording. Uh, Most of this happened in Europe, in the Netherlands, in Holland. So that's pretty much a short view of how my music career started.
Sure. So after you got this inspiration from the Glenn Miller story, and who played Glenn Miller now? Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart, yeah.
Okay. I guess he had a lot of charisma then, huh?
Oh man, they couldn't have picked a better actor to play Glenn Miller than Jimmy Stewart. I wouldn't know who that could be anyway.
Yeah. So you switched from baritone horn to trombone.
Immediately.
And then you continued your studies in music and got to be a better player and
Oh yeah.
an
Well,
opportunity.
I have to give my folks a lot of credit at this point because my dad uh, would bring home a lot of records. He would bring home every Friday. He would bring home a bunch of records,
Hmm.
and I couldn't wait for Friday to roll around because I knew I was gonna be getting some more records, and I began listening to uh, all kinds of people. Um, Glenn Miller's band, Benny Goodman's band, Artie Shaw, and then of course the Basie band and Duke Ellington. Very inspiring to a young guy, and I just went from there. I just kept on following my nose and trying to behave myself, which wasn't always easy.
Yeah, most of those artists you mentioned, I grew up listening to because my dad would play the same records, and so I
Yeah.
know the type of music you're talking about. So
Yes.
you're highly inspired by those artists, and you dug in and got your education, became a great player. Then, what opportunities started to come first?
Well, it was funny because by the end of my senior year of high school, I didn't have any set plans. And then my mom found this agency in our neighborhood that more or less found a college for you, and she found me a college which was located in Mississippi, of all places. And the reason we picked that one, I had a few that were interested in me, but I picked the college in Mississippi because they seemed to be a little more interested than the others. So
Mhm.
that made the decision easier. And so I went down to Mississippi in September of 1959. The first thing that happened down there was I met a guy who was like the most famous musician in that part of Mississippi. His name was Dalton Smith. He had just graduated from school in the previous year, June of '58, and he went straight to Stan Kenton's band. That's no easy feat
Yeah.
for most college musicians. But this guy, he played like nobody. He was that good, and so that's all I heard about when I hit town was Dalton Smith, Dalton Smith. And then the most amazing thing happened. Lo and behold, he shows up at school just on a break. The Kenton band had a break,
Mhm.
and I don't know. I guess he decided he was going to visit school, maybe do a little bragging, which he was entitled to, and there he was, big tall guy with a blonde crew cut, nice looking man. He looked like if he wasn't a great trumpet player, he could have been a linebacker or a fullback for a pro football team. He was big.
He was a big guy.
And, when he was ready to go back on the Kenton band, I don't know, about a week or so later, we gave him a party, a send off party. And we hosted it at a club, near the school, and we all brought our horns, and we had a little jam session. And he came up to me before we were all ready to head off, home and so forth. And he said, "Man," he says, "you sounded pretty good. Where'd you say you were from?" I said, "Well, I'm from New York." "Oh man, that's perfect." He says, "Look up so and so and so and so and so and so." And it came to pass that I did that. I looked up these people, and before I knew it, in 1960, towards the summertime, I got a chance to do a rehearsal with Charlie Barnett's band, and then from that rehearsal, one of the trombone players also said, "Man, you sound good." So he says, "Would you be interested in a gig with the Tommy Dorsey band?" I
Wow.
said, "You got to be kidding me now. You got to be putting me on. You know, who wouldn't be interested in that?" So that came to pass too. I auditioned for the Tommy Dorsey band
Mhm.
and was hired by Warren Covington. Tommy had passed away a couple of years before,
Ah,
and Warren Covington was fronting the band. He was a brilliant trombonist too,
mhm.
like Tommy was. And so I showed up one night to audition, and he hired me. And
And
we left on a tour that same evening.
what?
Yep. He,
And
he
you were
said
hired?
he said we're leaving from the Plymouth Hotel at midnight. He says be there.
Wow.
And I still had to bring my folks' car home,
Hmm.
pack a bag, and then head back in the opposite direction towards New York City, and get there by midnight. I got there at 10 to 12. Ten
Wow.
minutes 10 minutes to spare.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So you were how old then? About
18.
18 years old, on tour instantly with the Dorsey band, one of the greatest bands out there at the time, I'm
It
assuming.
was it was the greatest. Yeah.
Wow. And so how long did this tour last about?
It was a couple of months, and then instead of I don't know, doing something else, um, through the wife of the lead alto player, who was a singer,
Hmm.
she recommended me to her agent, and found out that Johnny Long happened to need a trombone player right away. His trombone player was getting drunk every night, so I was hired immediately to go on Johnny Long's band. Warren gave me his permission, the green light to do that, and
Hmm.
he told me I could always come back to his band anytime I wanted to, which I took him up on about 7 years later. I played with him again in 1967, briefly.
So were you about the youngest guy in the band at that time?
I was the youngest.
Yeah. How did the guys treat you?
That's a good question. You know, I have to say that they were all pretty nice.
Mhm.
Uh, some were nicer than others, but
Sure.
nobody treated me poorly. Let's put it that way. Everybody was nice and supportive, and especially Warren Covington. This guy was an amazing guy. Like I said, he was a brilliant trombonist. Uh, he also sang amazingly, beautiful voice,
Okay.
and he could have been a leading man in any Hollywood movie. That's how nice looking he was. You'll see some pictures of him, Warren Covington. Eh,
Sure.
Pretty, yeah, pretty amazing guy, and he liked me. That was the most important thing to me. So
Now, being underage, did you ever have any issues getting in and out of the clubs, or did you do clubs?
that's an excellent question. Actually, you kind of read my mind, because on that very first bus trip that night I auditioned, um, on the way up the freeway or wherever we were going, Warren came and sat down next to me, and he said, because not only was I 18, but I was baby faced. I had, believe it or not, now you see this face, but
Right.
my 18-year old face was a baby face. I
Sure.
didn't even look 18. And he came up to me and said, "Listen, if anybody comes up to you out on any of these gigs and says how old are you, you tell them 23." And you know what? Believe it or not, nobody ever asked me my age. I don't know why, because I sure did look young.
Yeah.
But I guess people figured if if this guy's got a job playing with this band, he must be okay, you know.
Sure.
So they left me alone. I wasn't bothered by anybody.
Yeah, you were a VIP, man.
You can say that again. Wow.
Okay, so moving on from there, what happens next? Where do you go?
Well, so from those bands, I played with other bands, and um, I was good through uh, up through about the middle of 1964. Then Uncle Sam put his claws in me, and he grabbed me, and I wound up playing in a military band,
Sure.
and spent most of my 2 years was spent over in Germany with a infantry division band.
Hmm.
It was not the greatest band, but let's put it this way, it was better than not playing at all. So
Gotcha.
thank goodness.
You have anything, Leon?
Well, I was curious. What was your first paychecks like? Were they paying you well? Were they, just
Um,
giving you beer money? How did that work?
well, that's another really good question, because backstepping back to that first night with Warren Covington and auditioning and being hired, I was so excited at that very moment that I was being hired to go on this band and actually leave to go on tour uh, that night, that the only thing that I could think of at that moment was to get the heck out of there and get in my folks' car and start driving back to Long Island, because I didn't want this guy to change his mind. So, I didn't even ask what the gig paid. I didn't. I just thanked him and did an about face and headed to my folks' car. Got in the car and drove back to Long Island. Took me about, I don't know, 30 or 40 minutes to get home. And then I really didn't have much time to get that suitcase packed. Mom had to even wash some clothes and iron. I don't know how it all came together, but somehow they got me onto the Long Island Railroad in enough time to make it to the city, New York City, and get to this hotel. And I made it with 10 minutes to spare.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wasn't like you had a cell phone. You could call them up and say, "Hey,
Oh
mom."
no,
No.
no, no such thing. But to answer your question, uh, I didn't even it never even entered my mind to ask how much I was going to be paid. And to answer the question a little better, when I did start to get paid paychecks, it wasn't a lot of money. I think it was something like $100 or $115 a week,
Mhm.
which for 1960 was not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Different economy back then, of course.
yeah, I actually did very, very well. And if he would have said to me, "Listen, man, you sounded good and everything, and we do have a chair for you, but I got no more budget. I can't pay you anything. Are you still interested?" I would have said yes. I would have taken the gig regardlessly. But that wasn't the case. I did get paid, not much, but
Sure.
you know.
So, I guess in connection with that, having been in the industry for so long, and then having started out and getting paid not on a royalties type situation. Is that you, Warren?
No.
Oh.
No, I turned it off.
Oh, okay. Because Warren likes to play music, and so I didn't mean to be accusatory, if that's what I was. But
in the middle of an interview.
Sure. So you've seen the industry change a lot, especially as far as pay and what was the royalties like? So I guess there's a two-part question. What were the royalties like at that time, and what was the environment like as far as the industry itself?
Yeah, well, musicians didn't get royalties at all back in the day. So, royalties were reserved if you were a writer, and you got lucky. You had to not only be a writer, but you needed to get lucky and land a writing gig for somebody. And not only that, but that song or those songs that you wrote needed to get recorded, and somehow, maybe not a hit record, but something good had to happen with that recording. Otherwise, you didn't get anything anyway. Mm. So, otherwise, it was well. I can tell you this. Here's the main difference, and I tell this to young musicians whenever I do a seminar or teach a class or so. I tell them, listen. The main change that I saw was when I started in 1960. I was 18, and I got hired to play on a leading band. Now that, even though that was relatively uncommon, it was not impossible in that time. So as a trombone player, I could get hired and get a gig, and that's what I did. Like I said, I went from Warren's band to Johnny Long's band, and then I played in a very, very good band after that, the Les and Larry Elgart's band. They were hot in about 1962, and now that turned out to be an interesting story right there, because actually I was hired by Larry Elgart. He was the better of the two brothers as far as musicians were concerned, and he had the better band. Although they were both very, very good. If you hear that band, you'll be impressed. So Larry started a brand new chapter of his band in 1962, and he had auditions. And I got hired to play first trombone. By that time, 2 years later, after I started, I'd picked up some gusto, some experience. Mm-hmm. And my chops were good. I was always a good reader. And so, I was ready for that gig with the Elgart band. So I got hired to play first trombone. About a week into the tour, the manager of the band said he was leaving the band, and he recommended me for manager.
Oh.
And Larry went along with it. I was 20 at that point. I was just shy of my 21st birthday, and so here I am now playing first trombone and managing the band.
All at 20.
At age 20. And it keeps going, because in November of 62, a month after my birthday, 21st birthday, one of my first assignments as manager was to hire the band to play a studio recording session, and I hired every player on that session. Some of these guys were famous, very famous, like George Duvivier was the bass player, and Barry Galbraith was the guitar player. Larry didn't use his whole road band on that session. He used me. He used the first trumpet player, Tom Perello, and he used. Hang on one second. I apologize. Hey Yash, I'm on the radio right now. I'm doing an interview. Can I call you right afterwards? I will. Thank you, man. That was my son. And
No problem.
anyway, there I was, 21, and I hired the band to play on an album that's still available. If you go to YouTube and you look up Keep Moving, you'll find the entire album, 12 cuts. And that was the session that I did. And I was 21 years old and 1 month at that point.
Wow.
Yeah. And from there, it kept on getting better, man. I played with Woody Herman's band, and I played with a lot of bands, and I got hired to play in Clark Terry's very first big band in the summer of 1967. We played at the Half Note, a very famous jazz club in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And now that band was incredible. You had Zoot Sims and Al Cohn, Phil Woods and Gene Quill, and Danny Bank was the saxophone section.
Wow.
It's about as good as it gets. And
big names.
yeah, I was playing first trombone, and in my section was a very wonderful musician, a young lady by the name of Melba Liston.
Mm-hmm.
She was a very good trombone player, but she was, if you can believe this, she was even a better arranger. She was famous already for her arrangements. Matter of fact, on that band, on that gig, we played a lot of her music. So
wow.
So
yeah.
So you've had an opportunity, because you've been in the industry for so long. You've had a lot of opportunities to look at how music has changed.
Yes, I have.
Because you don't hear a lot of big band anymore. It kind of has fallen. It's kind of a niche. Now. So explain how going through that. What was some of the mindsets of the people dealing with that, and how did you deal with that change?
Well, how I eventually dealt with it was, you have to understand that by this time I played with so many good bands. I became a pretty good trombone player, good enough that I had to, as you're alluding to, I had to make a change. I had to change directions. Mm-hmm. And the direction that I chose was studios. I chose because other than big bands, a studio was the only place you could make a good living. That's it. That's the only place that existed around 1967, 68. You remember I said that I tell young musicians the main difference was in the 60s, I was able to earn a living playing in one big band or another, and that's not possible these days. Mm-hmm. Now, here's an irony that I have to introduce this irony, because you're right about the big bands more or less dying out. But here's the irony. today there are way more, even more big bands than there ever were. Now you're probably wondering, that doesn't make any sense. Well, here's why it makes sense. Because the music, the big band music, never went away. The jobs went away. The jobs disappeared, but the music didn't disappear. It even got more fervent. You know, more musical, more interesting, and around I don't know, I'm going to say late 60s, maybe 1970, two musicians changed the whole topography of the jazz world. And they were Clark Terry and Stan Kenton. Both of those guys decided that there was one big thing missing in jazz, and that was the educational influence of jazz in schools. So both of these guys introduced jazz into the colleges. They did it almost simultaneously with one another. I don't say they planned it that way, but that's just how it came out. And yeah, go ahead.
What part of the country do you think this happened in first? Was it?
It was definitely, you know, somewhere in the east. It wasn't. I don't believe it was the west.
Okay.
The west. I think the west came later.
Right.
But I can tell you this, that I just mentioned that I'd played with Clark's. That was his very first big band in 1967 at the Half Note. And then I went over to Europe for 7 years and stayed in touch with Clark. He's a guy, once you're in contact with him, you always stay in touch with him. I was in touch with him up to and including his passing in 2015 at 95. We were in touch for 55 years. And that included every time he came to Europe in the period that I was over there, the 7 years, he always sent me a postcard, a letter, and or called me when he got to Europe, and hired me to play with him in Europe. So when I got back home, I left Europe finally in '74. One of the first things that happened was I got a phone call from Clark, and he hired me to go on tour with his band. Now here's the difference between the 1967 and the '74 band. Mm-hmm. Now, here it is, 1974, and where were we playing? We were playing at colleges and universities. Okay. That's it.
Right.
That's all we did. Went from one college to the next to the next. I remember playing a gig at the University of South Carolina with Clark and the big band. And I ran into two musicians that I'd been in college with the short time I was in college. Mm-hmm. These guys were the directors of music at University of South Carolina. And they said, "No, that couldn't be. Is that you, Rich?" I said, "Yeah, here I am." And so, yeah, you know, by that time, by the mid-'70s, academic jazz was coming into its own. And then from there, I mean, we're just talking about the two pioneers, Stan Kenton and Clark Terry. Mm-hmm. But after that, every good musician in the country, in the world, that was good and smart, musically good musician, started getting into educational jazz. That was it, and it stuck. It stuck. So where I'm going with this is that back to the big bands and how uh, big band popularity dwindled, but there were more big bands than ever, and that happened because of academics.
Mhm.
That's how all the big bands started materializing.
Okay.
They materialized through some of the colleges that we mentored, that we tutored, that we taught at. Now they had their own bands, and they were, starting to get into another generation already. It doesn't take long.
So I was
So
gonna.
that, yeah, so that stuck. That stuck. And now today, here we are in the 2020s, and man, you have hundreds of big bands all over the place, and one's better than the next. I'm telling you, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was. So you had talked about how you were doing jazz at colleges. Do you feel
Yeah.
like the doing that and adding jazz to colleges kind of helped jazz along, or was it a situation that it just helped jazz maintain its status until jazz itself started to catch on more?
Well,
You know what I mean?
that's a very excellent question, wonderful question, and it reminds me that when I was living in Europe, so we're backtracking now
Okay.
into the late 60s, very early 70s. And I remember being at a get together, with some friends at one of their homes. And we were sitting outside. I guess it was summertime, and we're having a drink or something sitting on this guy's terrace. It was a nice house. And I remember saying something like, you know, what's going to happen? It hadn't happened yet, not to my knowledge. Well, what's going to happen is we're going to create this generation of musicians is going to teach the next generation. And that generation is going to teach the next one. And I said, from this point on, it's just going to be one generation of musicians teaching the next generation. That's how jazz is going to. That's how jazz is going to turn out. It's going to be a teaching thing, and so to try to answer your question, that's what did happen. Um, so we lost the work influence of big band jazz, but we picked up a sort of an excellence in musicality. Anyway, we developed that big band music up a couple of notches into a much higher degree of musicality. So right now, if you go anywhere around the country, you go to like a school like North Texas State,
Mhm.
which is one of the pioneer schools that started it in the beginning, which I was talking about a little while ago. And you'll hear a band. As a matter of fact, I recommend it to you guys, and I recommend it to the listeners. Go over to YouTube and look up North Texas State, and you'll be amazed. Because you've never heard a better big band in the professional ranks, and back in the day or whenever. This band stands in a class of their own. But just as I say that, there's a bunch of schools like that. You can look up pretty much any college. University of Illinois, University of Michigan, University of uh, UCLA, USC. I mean, there's so many good college bands, and these people that are in the bands are going to get their degree. Some of them get a degree every year, and they go off into a new direction, and they get involved with another band and another college, and you can multiply that, I don't know, by hundreds or thousands going into the ranks of teaching professionals in jazz every year. And that's what jazz is. It's one big teaching ground.
Sure, sure.
So one of the things I like to ask um, musicians when they come on, because most of them have done the traveling, which seems to be kind of a initiation into being a better musician. What
Yeah.
was being on the road like for you, especially from a young age? Because you've seen the hotel chains change. The quality of the inns, the more amenities that they offer.
Right.
What was that kind of like?
Well, when I first started out, I remember a hotel room was $5 for the night, and when I became manager, I told you I was manager of the Elgart band. Uh, the hotels gave me a free room every night as manager because I was bringing the band to their hotel. I could have brought it to any hotel, but I brought it to their hotel. So as a courtesy, I got a free room. And as a good guy, I never used that manager thing with the musicians. No, I never did that. I was just plain old Rich, the trombone player, right?
Right.
And but what I did do was, because my room was free, I would take a couple of them, at least one, but maybe even two, to stay with me that every night. I'd pick a couple of different guys, and so they had a free night. The hotels, in pretty short order, started going up in price.
Mm-hmm.
The time I'm talking about were still the older, big, like, high-rise hotels, kind of brick buildings, that older look. The new architecture started coming into place, I guess, in the mid '60s to late '60s. Certainly by 1970, you started getting the more modern hotels. Of course, the prices went up dramatically from that point on.
Of course.
So, and that was another deterrent for the business, because you couldn't pay the musicians enough for them to be able to afford the raises in rates and stuff. That caused that caused some concern among the band leaders and so forth, agents, bookers, that kind of thing, because it was becoming increasingly more difficult to keep a band out there. And whereas everyone did, let's say, okay, the musicians, the dance halls, the band leaders, the agencies, everybody had to make a buck, right?
Great. So you traveled all over Europe.
Yes.
And you got married in Europe,
Holland.
Holland.
Yeah.
So there's always this. I don't know. You can call it a romantic notion. You can call it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
The idea of the people playing in the band, and they go home with a different girl every night and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What was your life like? What was your personal life like, during this time?
Well, you know, it's yeah, you're right about that, but I don't know. I don't know if it was my seriousness, my age, or lack of experience of what, as far as girls are concerned. I don't recall having a girlfriend for a long time, um, and and I'm trying. Yeah, I know I had at least one. I remember a very, very pretty young lady from Ohio. We were, and I also remember another very pretty young lady from Virginia. I think those were my only two girlfriends in the time before I went to Europe. When I went to Europe and I met my wife almost immediately, she turned out to be a recording producer for the Philips company, and I played almost immediately upon getting to that part of Holland. I immediately played a recording session with a Dutch guy who was pretty famous. He's famous in Holland. He was also famous in the States. He introduced he introduced Herbie Mann, and he also introduced a famous female singer. I can't think of her name. And his name was Matt Matthews. And Matt had just gotten sponsored by an Indonesian financier, and he got his own record company. Now here he is, has me in the studio. I'm like 2 days in Holland, and I'm playing a session already. And that kicked my career off, because the next day the word got all around the recording community, and my phone was ringing the next day.
Wow.
I was getting hired on sessions right away.
So was being in the business how you met her, or was it just through some other?
No, it was through Matt. Matt used that studio, and she was the producer, and I knew that session was going to be one of my most seriously important gigs of my career. I knew I had to go into that studio and play my ass off. That's it. And I like to think that I did. I think I did. And from there on, everything went my way. I got the woman, I got the gig.
The girl was the icing on the cake, huh?
Yeah, and the cherries, and a couple of others, a lot of whipped cream, and yeah.
So,
You got a kid.
one of the things that you mentioned is women in the music industry, and I'm sure at that time there probably weren't a lot of women in music.
Well,
the early 1960s.
no, that's
50s.
true. I mean, I can tell you for sure that in Holland in 1968, other than my wife and two other female producers, there were three female producers in Holland at that time. My wife and two other women, but there were no female musicians, none. I cannot recall one lady musician. Now that may have been different in in New York or L.A., Chicago. I don't know. I wasn't there then. I was in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
There were no lady musicians that I recall over in Holland working.
So was being in the music industry, was that a source of contention with your wife at the time?
Oh, not at all. No, because she was in the business. She was a producer.
Did she?
She was
right
there. She was right there in the studios
Yeah. Did
And
you and her have an opportunity to work together too?
that's what I'm talking about. We always work
Oh,
together.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
We met on a gig that I had. This guy Matt Matthews used her studio and used her actually as producer of that first session that I did. So, and I played very well. I mean, I don't mean to, brag or anything, but there were no trombone players in 1968 that could play trombone like I did.
Mm-hmm.
I could play higher, faster, slower, lower, you name it. And so, that's why my phone started ringing. And she started, she developed a pretty quick interest in me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And before I knew it, she was pregnant. And that's how my son was born. Uh, the fellow that just tried to call me,
Sure.
he was born 12 days before the end of 1968. 13 days.
Okay. Wow.
Yep.
So I'm thinking that after all these years, you've met some great artists, producers, you've traveled around the world.
Yeah.
But looking back, what are some of your fondest memories, would you say?
Well, that one, with Matt and my wife Ada, and finding out that I was going to become a daddy before the end of the year.
Okay.
And actually, I know this is going to sound impossible, but I had a premonition in January before I went over to Holland. I went to Holland in February.
Mm-hmm.
On the subway train in New York in January. I had a premonition that I was going to have a little boy before the end of the year. And like I said, I made it by 13 days. How's that?
Were you
Yeah.
a superstitious person?
Not superstitious, no.
No. I mean,
No.
some people have routines that they have to go through before they do their concert or before they do play
Yeah.
their
No,
sport.
I never
or,
did. No.
Hmm.
I never had that. I did have, like I said, I had visions,
Mm-hmm.
like this one I'm telling you about, that I was going to have a son sometime that year. I didn't know how, where, why, with who, but I did know that I would have a son, but by the end of the year. And like I said, he was born December 18th, 13 days before the end of the year. So I just made it.
Good. So, you were married at the time, right?
Yeah.
And then in your statement, you just said you didn't know by who. So should I pursue that line of question longer or just let it go?
No, you don't have to let it go. I just want you to understand
No, I'm just
what I
I'm
what I
just
what I meant.
yeah. It
This
was
was
just
this,
meant to be a joke.
oh, that's okay. I was in New York City, and now all this came to pass. I didn't even know in January that I was going to Holland the next month. I
Mhm.
left New York February 14th, 1968.
Mm-hmm.
Much to my mother's ultimate chagrin, because I left on Valentine's Day. I never thought of that. I never planned it that way, but
Mm-hmm.
there it was. But I know I made it up to them more or less in spades
Sure.
from that point on. So
Was there anything in your career that you've wanted to do that the opportunity didn't present itself, or it didn't? You got started in it and it didn't pan out the way you thought it would.
no. I thought you're asking very, very good questions, and actually I thought of that subject that you just mentioned. I've thought of that many times. You know, um, But I started out as a trombone player. I held on to the horn even when I started arranging in '68. I still played trombone for quite a number of years after that. And then, in the Dutch period, as you know, I started arranging, composing, writing songs. I added lyrics a few years later and got serious with lyrics. Um, and I'd always been a singer. I hadn't mentioned that before,
Oh,
but I started singing when I was 2 years of age, and people loved me. When I was a kid, that I always got compliments. Oh, you're so good. I remember singing, uh, Al Jolson's songs. This tune, Mammy, my Mammy, the sun shines east, the sun shines west, that I love best. You know, I was singing that, and the way I was singing it, the way Al sang it, because he got down on one knee. So when I performed it at theaters and stuff. I'd get down on one knee. This cute little boy, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of age, and I would sing "Mammy" on one knee. That killed him. That killed the audience. So the singing kept going and kept going, and songwriting and the lyrics and producing and trombone playing, and so I don't know, at some point I'd accomplished every job that you can think of in music, in popular music. And not only that, but I'd started mainly in jazz, and I was able to cross the line, cross the street, and get into pop. And as I said, I even wrote a country song, and I got into all these new genres, and I like that. I was like kind of narrow minded to begin with, but jazz is jazz is an okay thing to be narrow minded in. If you're going to be narrow minded in any genre of music, let it be jazz, because that is the highest form of musicality. It's got the highest form of music in it, and all the chords and all the harmonies are very sophisticated. It really takes a very good musician to not only comprehend it, but to go another step further and be able to recreate that music in your own style. And so I learned to do all those things. And I have recorded examples of that, of me involved in all the different genres of music, as one thing or another, singer, player, writer, producer.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So I only got to have a couple of more questions. One is, of all the hats that you've worn in music, which one do you think probably is your favorite?
Well, it would have to be writing, because writing encompasses everything. I mean, I couldn't have, like, I stopped playing trombone, uh, not because I wanted to, but because my teeth went south, and I got a bad mouth, and I couldn't play anymore.
Okay.
That's how that happened. So I was able, because I had started writing over in Holland in '68. When this happened, I was able to make the transition smoothly right away. I moved into writing and never looked back, you know. And I write, like I said, I write all kinds of things. I was speaking of Clark Terry. I wrote Clark Terry something called Soliloquy for Clark Terry. It's with a big orchestra,
Mhm.
and I wrote it for his 90th birthday. And I flew down to Arkansas, where he was living at the time, to present him with a CD. And he said, "Man," he says, this is the greatest honor that he says that he'd ever gotten, was, you know, a musician that he knew would write a theme for him to become 90 years of age. And I said, "You know, I'm so happy to hear you say that, Clark. I couldn't think of anyone else that I would do this for. You know, you're the only musician in existence, you know, and you know, and then and I also did it for a trumpet player when he turned 90, a guy by the name of Yuan Racy. And yeah, I wrote his own song, and I wrote Clark's own song. I said to Clark that evening on his 90th birthday, was December 14th, 2010. I said, "Look, man, you stick around at least another year, and I'll write lyrics to this thing." And sure enough, I wrote lyrics to the same song, and my daughter recorded it for him at 91. And 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 he called. Listen, man, he called her. He called her on the phone. First thing he did was he said to me, "How do you know so much about me that you could write these kind of lyrics?" I said, my answer was very simple. I said, "How? Because I love you. That's how."
Wow.
And, you know, I couldn't have been more honest than that, because it's the truth. This guy was, well, there's a line in the song, you know, he's a great musician, but he's a better man. You understand?
I understand. Absolutely.
You know, and that's what I came up with, you know. And he asked me before he called Brooke on the phone. I went down to Arkansas again when he was 91 to give him that record. And "How do you know so much about me?" I said, "Well, you know, I love you," and that spread to interest and research and everything good about, you know, when you love a person. And then he called Brooke and he complimented her, and he had done the same thing the year before with the trumpet player that played the first tune. He called Gary Grant, and he complimented him. Oh, he also said to Gary, this is kind of cute. He says, "Hey, man," he says, "you played that better than any trumpet player I know, except one." And you know which one it was, right?
that was easy to figure out.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
telegraphed that one.
Yeah.
So I've got
that-
one more
that-
question, and then I want you to
Okay.
share about your daughter, because I know you're pretty proud of her.
Yes.
How did you get in? I know you've made it your mission to give back what you've learned to children, and what
Right.
prompted that? How did you get started with that, and how is that going for you?
Well, that started with Clark Terry, you know, in 1974. I told you that he had hired me when I came back from Europe to do a tour with his band. And that tour was exclusively colleges. And Clark sat the band down one night. This is completely unlike him. He sat us all down. He said, listen, I'm not going to be around forever. So he says, I would personally appreciate it if you guys carry this, what I'm doing, carry it on forward. And I told him that night, I went up to him and I called him CT. I said, CT, you got my word, okay? As long as I'm alive on this earth, I will do that. And I have done that. So I teach two levels of students. The one I'm kind of, I guess you could say, most proud of is I teach the little elementary school kids the history of jazz. Brooke is a school teacher. She teaches elementary school music in Vegas. And every year, it's coming up soon, in February is Black History Month. And I go to the school and I teach the history of jazz. Because, I don't know, I guess it's arguable, but I can't think of a more important thing to attribute to the, to the black community is the invention of jazz. Can you? I can't.
Musically, absolutely.
And then the other level of music that I teach is the older children, high school seniors and college students. I just did a seminar with my alma mater, the school I went to shortly in Mississippi. I spent a session with them on a virtual basis on the computer, teaching them a song that I had written called The 13th Journey. And they said they liked it so much they asked me to write it for their big band. Been in the process of doing since then. So come, I don't know, probably April or May of this year, they should be recording it. Well, I'll be very proud of that once it's recorded.
Sure. Okay, so unless you have something else, Warren, I'm going to let you talk about your daughter and then add anything that you'd like as we close out the show.
All right, thank you very much. Well, Brooke, I have three children. Brooke and another young lady are my daughters, and this fellow that tried to call me, Yasha, he's my son. He's older than the two girls. I started another marriage and had them, and Brooke is the only one of the three that turned out to become a musician. She academically achieved 3 degrees. She got a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees in music. Besides that, and I know this sounds terrible, but I can't help it. I worked with so many good singers in my career, but Brooke outshadows all of them. We were talking earlier about imagining things. I imagine, and I've imagined this many times, I imagine Ella Fitzgerald coming over to me at some concert and saying, Rich, Brooke is amazing. And I swear to you that had circumstances gone a little differently, and had she remained alive and Brooke, singing and blah blah blah, I'm sure it would have happened. That's how good Brooke is. Brooke is amazing. I tried to get Brooke on stage with Barbara Streisand. I tried to get her on stage with Mariah Carey. I tried to get her on stage with Celine Dion, but none of them. I couldn't do it. They would no. None of them would do it. And I don't blame them. What's for them to gain? They only stand to lose, and lose they would have had that come to pass. So that's but she decided, after I tried to promote her and her amazing voice for many years, she said, "You know what, Dad, I'm going to turn to school, teaching school." And with her degrees and everything, she was ready. And now she's in her fifth or sixth year as an elementary school music teacher. And like I said, every February I go up to her school and teach her students the history of jazz. And I get a chance to not only teach jazz history, but see Brooke in action. And I have to say this, I was sort of resentful somewhat that she didn't go straight ahead into professional singing. But after I've seen the children react to her school teaching, I know she made the right decision. She definitely did. Yeah.
What's your favorite song that Brooke sings?
Well, I guess I know it sounds terrible, but I guess I don't have one. I guess any one of them turns out to be my favorite because they all have every single song, and there's probably at least about 20. They all have a story to them.
Well, name one that you're on.
Oh, well, I'm on all of them. I'm on all of them. Yeah, I know. Well, if you go to my website,
Mm-hmm.
You'll have the opportunity to choose, like I said, out of about 20 songs, and she did a song. I wrote a song among many called "Loving You." That's probably gonna turn out to be, my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good enough. That's all I got, Leon.
All right, close us out, Warren, and we're done.
Well,
thank you. By the way, thank you for having me.
Rich Pulin, it's been a pleasure, and consider me a new friend. I like your music. Let's stay in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
I hope so. I hope we keep in touch. I love your show.
Thank you.
I've listened to some of your older shows. They're excellent. I'm glad you're doing this. You're doing a very good service to the jazz community, and I commend you for it, both of you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. I've enjoyed talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you, again.
I hope in the near future.
Absolutely.
Take care now.
Bye now.
Take care, man. Take care, guys.
City Jazz Sessions is brought to you by St. Louis City Jazz, a 501c3 company dedicated to music education and appreciation. The CEO is Magic Man 50, and for more ways to connect with City Jazz Sessions, visit cityjazzsessions.wixsite.com/St. Louis. The City Jazz Sessions team includes host, content director, and guest coordinator, jazz great Ronnie Barrage. Follow Ronnie at ronniebarrage.biz. Host, website designer, graphic artist, content director, and guest coordinator, singing sensation Leica. Discover more about Leica at leicamusic.com. Additional production services are provided by Lions Den Productions. Go to thelionsdenstl.wixsite.com/home. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more great content.